sir, with Ponte Freed. Can I take your order, please?
Welcome to the Gibbons Talks Boxing YouTube channel. Please subscribe if you've not done so already. Today is Sunday in the UK time, day after the Canelo Billy Joe Saunders fight. I wanted to talk about the fight. I was going to come on and say a few words myself, but I noticed Ben Doughty's name pop up on Facebook, and I thought he'd be a great guy to speak to. Ben, for those who don't know, is a boxing trainer, personal trainer, has done a bit of punditry as well, and also a friend, a personal friend of Billy Joe Saunders. So I thought he'd be a great guy to speak to about the fight last night. And I just want to thank Ben. I only give him about half hour or 3/4 of an hour notice for this. So thanks, Ben, for your time. I appreciate you give me some of your time this afternoon. Obviously, you watched the fight live last night, Ben. I mean, what was your initial thoughts now looking back on it?
I thought he did really well. I thought he started off tentatively, but you know, it was a decent start, a little bit tentative. I thought he really started to get a foothold and started to convince certainly the American commentary on DAZN by about the 4th or the 5th round. And obviously there was a difference of opinion between Sergio Mora and Chris Mannix. Chris Mannix had Billy Joe a couple of rounds up shortly before the finish, if not just before it. Whereas Sergio Mora thought Canelo was edging the fight. But I thought Billy Joe was a really credible effort, really credible performance. And I think he was starting to really believe that he could do it and could hang at that level and was warming into it. And then, as you know, he missed with a southpaw lead hook, got nailed with a right uppercut from Canelo, and it was almost like a cartoon, you know, comic book kind of eye suddenly shuts. And I think we knew, I don't know what you thought, but I think we knew there was a very big problem at that moment. And then when he was back in the corner, I could see what was going to happen. And I'm gutted it ended that way, because I think even if he'd have lost on points, and the scorecards tend to indicate he probably would have done, I think it would have been a real moral victory. Inevitably, I'm not saying that he quit, absolutely not, but those accusations have been made, and so inevitably the performance is a little bit tainted because it ended the way it did. You know, so I went from having all the hope in the world that he was performing on the big stage and was doing himself proud, to the next minute that kind of ignominious finish, you know.
Yeah, I think it started interestingly. I mean, I thought that Billy Joe would possibly be ahead after the first 6 rounds. And I'm just looking at my scorecard here now in front of me, and I actually had it even going in after 6 rounds, 3 rounds each. I give Billy the first round, Canelo the next 3, and then Billy 5 and 6. But Canelo, for me at least, he sometimes takes a few rounds to zero in on his target to get into a flow of a fight. But straight away, he started zeroing in, especially with the hooks. He throws big white hooks, but he always seems to find the target with them.
Yeah, he is, because he's very economical about what he does. He's not necessarily going to outland somebody, but he's very effective with his punch placement. And also think, you know, for whatever reason, Kieran, he seems to have this bone-breaking punching power today that he didn't have 10 years ago when he couldn't really put a dent in Matthew Hatton significantly, you know. I will talk about why that might be. I think the stigma of performance enhancing drugs is over him, because of, you know, he's obviously got the one ban that he served, quite lenient as it was for clenbuterol back in 2018. He's definitely a monster now, isn't he, punching power wise? I mean, Eddie Hearns said it's a different kind of power, and you can hear the punches landing, you know. So I don't think he even had that kind of power when he fought Miguel Cotto in 2015. So something has developed, hasn't it, I think?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know whether it's a case of, because he's allowed his body to grow into its natural size, that might have something to do with it. Or, like you said, there could be other reasons. The drugs issue, which he got off very leniently with. I mean, I've certainly got, it seems, preferential treatment compared to other fighters who had been in similar situations. But just back to the fight. I had Canelo up 3-1 up going into the 5th, and then Billy Joe Saunders, just when it looked like the fight might be running away from him a little bit. And before the fight, this is the period of the fight where I thought that Canelo might start taking over. To his credit, Billy Joe Saunders, he started to find his pace, and then he started to almost outpunch Canelo at times.
Yeah, and I think his style was bamboozling Canelo in spells. You notice when Billy Joe gets very low and starts rolling, really goes really low, almost to the canvas to roll out the way of some of those hooks, and he was stepping over into an orthodox stance sometimes and scoring. And I think his style was causing him, plenty of problems, like I always thought it would do. I mean, people were endlessly asking me for a prediction before the fight, and I said I wouldn't give one. But what I did say, my bottom line was that he would win more rounds than Callum Smith did, and he would do a whole lot better than he did. And he did. Unfortunately, he just didn't go the distance, because of the reasons why. And some people are saying it's obviously a broken eye socket. It's a serious injury which could be career-ending, and that you've got no right to second guess a fighter for remaining on the stool under those kind of circumstances. And as I'm sure you've seen it, some people are saying, oh, he quit. He was giving it all the Traveller fighting men talk before that. He'd rather die or be carried out the ring than ever give best, as they say. So it depends what kind of view you want to form. I think the problem is that Billy Joe, he's not a humble character. He's a Marmite sort of character. People love him or hate him kind of thing. And he unfortunately did make statements about Daniel Dubois, saying you've got to be carried out that ring, brother. I wouldn't care if I had 2 broken eye sockets, etc., etc. So that, I think you never know what's around the corner in life, and I obviously Billy Joe didn't know that situation was around the corner for him, and I think obviously it makes you feel different because you don't know how you react in those kind of situation. Mark Tibbs pulled the fight, as far as I could see. What some people are saying to me was you could see Billy Joe didn't protest when they asked him could he see. He just shook his head and said he couldn't. I think it was a serious injury. Whatever, no doubt we'll get details confirmed on it soon, but it was something that seemed to take all the fight out of Billy Joe,
Yeah. Just before we go on to the ending, Ben, like I mentioned, rounds 5 and 6 were probably Billy's best rounds. He's landing really good shots, and he seemed to have the most success when he held his feet for a few seconds or a few moments, land his shots, and then move away. I know that's a really high-risk strategy when you're fighting, a master counter-puncher like Canelo, but that strategy seemed to work for a couple of rounds for him.
I made you absolutely right, and I think you make a great distinction between bouncing and what some people call running, or circling too much and dancing too much. As you have eloquently pointed out, he was stepping and sliding, like you say. He was standing his ground. He was moving his head. He was throwing combinations. Then he was walking out. Instead of dancing out, he was walking out. And I think that was working well. And a few times he even got low and put his hands up and worked at close range with Canelo just for a millisecond. And I think it was working because it saves your legs as well. If you're going to run, I mean, I know he asked for a big ring, etc., but if you're going to run all night against a guy like Canelo, it will take its toll on your legs. So I thought I think the game plan was great. That obviously Billy Joe's natural boxing intellect, coupled with Mark Tibbs' experience and the game plan that they put together, I think it was all working. And Kieran, I don't think Canelo was breaking him down as such. Like some people are saying, you always knew who was the governor. Billy Joe was having to fight out of his skin to stay on level pegging with him, they said. Whereas you knew Canelo always had gears and he was good. I'm not saying he doesn't always have gears, and I know that he was in a degree of cruise control, but I don't think he was breaking Billy Joe down until he landed that shot. And I think you could tell Canelo knew how significant that was. He knew what a breakthrough, literally, that it was for him, as soon as he landed.
Yeah, because even round 7, that was a really close round, and I didn't score the fight when I watched it live, just because I wanted to enjoy the night and I wasn't working or anything. But I rescored it today, and round 7 I found it was a difficult round to score. I mean, I did score to Canelo, but you could certainly make an argument that Billy Joe possibly won that. So he had won 3 rounds on the bounce. So Canelo, I suppose, he had to get control of the fight again.
Yeah, and I no doubt he stepped it up and went up a gear, etc. Billy Joe made a mistake by throwing that slashing right hook, and he got countered, with pretty disastrous effect for him. As I say, I've got quite a lot of messages, people asking me, have I heard any news from Texas? How is he, etc. I must admit, I don't know yet. I would hope to hear. We'll probably all hear. There'll be some sort of press release or whatever that might detail the nature of the injury that he suffered. And perhaps that, if it is confirmed as being something really quite serious, no doubt that'll make some of the cat callers back off. But But I get the fact that some people are going to say that he made certain statements before the fight, even to Gareth Davies for DAZN, that he would have to be, you know, he'd have to be carried out in a box, which obviously that's not what we saw happen last night. But you know, I do suspect it was a pretty serious injury.
Like I mentioned at the top of the interview, you are a personal friend of Billy Joe, and you know Mark as well, his trainer. Were you privy to the tactics going into the fight, or had you spoke to Billy or his team about what tactics they were going to employ on the night?
No, not really. I spoke to Billy Joe, I think, the week before the fight, as I recall, and we just spoke about it. You know, I just said to him that, in my opinion, people to suggest that Canelo has improved since the Erislandy Lara fight, for instance, which a lot of people saw as a blueprint for victory for Billy Joe. I said I didn't know how much he'd really improved at the aspects he would need to nullify a slick, elite southpaw mover. The way I phrased it to him was he might have been, maybe he has improved, and he has, but he hasn't improved against your style, and he hasn't beaten anybody with who's going to give him the looks that you're going to give him on the night since he fought Lara, let's say, you know. I mean, Cotto was not a southpaw, but Cotto boxed and moved more than he would characteristically do in a fight, and I still think Cotto beat him, and I'll have that with anybody who thinks otherwise. I've done their rescores, you know, on Facebook and stuff. But no, I mean, I didn't discuss the intricacy of the game plan with him, but I did suspect he wasn't going to run all the time, because I knew he was bright enough to know that he wouldn't be enough. And I remember him when he fought David Lemieux, he said something similar that Dominic Ingle said to him: Billy Joe, don't bounce out all the time. Do me a favour, walk out of there, walk out of there. And that stuck with me. And that, as you said, he was doing that last night. He was walking out, in and out, but not on his toes, on the balls of his feet all the time. So, you know. I think Billy deserves a bit of credit as well, because he could have easily stayed to the tactics he employed at the start of the fight, which was moving around on the outside, bouncing around as you described it. But to his credit, he did take a risk. He did dare to be brave, or he basically grabbed the bull by the horns and stood with Canelo and threw his shots, and did land really good shots, snapping Canelo's head back several times. He actually had Canelo backing up several times in the fight. So I think Billy does deserve credit for doing that, which might get overlooked now in the way the fight ended. Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, he wanted to win. You know, he really wanted to win. And like you said, that skittering around the ring and throwing double and treble jabs wasn't really penetrating and wasn't really achieving. It was never going to win the fight doing that. And I think, like I say, he was a little bit tentative, which is understandable in the first 2 or 3 rounds. And when he found his groove in that middle part of the fight, and obviously it ended in the middle part of the fight, like you say, he was committing. He was gambling a little bit, because he wanted to score punches, and he wanted to win those titles, and he wanted to inherit the status that Canelo's got. So yeah, I mean, he does deserve a lot of credit, and it's just such a damn shame that it ended the way it did, because even if you have the best view in the world about it, it's still like a really anticlimactic, ignominious little crash, right? I mean, I was feeling one way, as you can imagine, hyped up during the fight, nervous but quite excited and quite hopeful. Even because I didn't see Kieran, I didn't care if he got robbed. That's going to sound wrong. Of course I cared. What I mean is, I was still going to take huge consolation if that happened in the performance. Yeah. You know what I mean? I was going to go on the basis of a boxing purist view that you all saw what happened, and I'm really proud of him, and that is that. But for it to end the way it did, it was just such like a, I imagine if you're a really big passionate football fan, right? You know, when England missed that decisive penalty, it means they're out.
Well, I'm Welsh anyway, Ben. So if England miss a penalty, I wouldn't. Rugby, yeah. I've just been.
But is there that crushing feeling? When
yeah.
All over. I was so excited. I was so hopeful. I was so committed. I was, an extension. He was an extension of the nerve fibers of the crowd and the supporters. And then suddenly you just feel this awful low, and it's like it's all over. He's retired on the stool, and that is that. It was awful.
Well, the way I saw it, I mean, I wasn't as emotionally involved as you. I massively admire Canelo as a fighter, and I like Billy. I do feel he perhaps hasn't done as much with his career as he could have done. But as I said, Canelo on my cards is winning the fight. Billy came back really well for 2 or 3 rounds, which really impressed me. Then Canelo had a massive 8th round. So I wanted to see what Billy was going to do in round 9, because I thought, wow, Billy's asked questions of Canelo, then Canelo's asked questions of Billy. I wanted to see, right, this is a chance to see what Billy is really made of. And like you said, there was that, I just had a real gutted feeling, we'd say probably in Wales, just really gutted that the fight was stopped. And there was a little bit of confusion. I mean, the commentators are probably a little bit misleading the way they described the ending. But then, as obviously we know now, Billy has probably had a serious eye injury. And that time will tell, I mean, how hard that injury was. But I really did feel disappointed in the way the fight ended, because that was Billy's moment to show if he is a great fighter or just a good fighter, if you like.
Yeah, I totally accept that. And I suppose the question ultimately, Ciaran, is could he have continued? Could he have gone along on that one more round philosophy? We'll give you one more round to make something happen, or to keep making it happen, or, you know, that's the question, isn't it? You know, could he have continued? Is there any worldly way he could have done it, or would that have been tantamount to suicide? You know, I'm hanging fire on that. You know, I was talking to my mate Julian McGowan on Facebook about this, and he was saying, you know, they're all brave, they're all warriors, or almost all fighters are. You know, you do get the odd exception where someone's behaved in a way that really cannot be considered as laudable, but for the most part, they all have an entry level of heroism, which a lot of ordinary people either don't have or haven't tapped into. But there are still levels. People say boxing's about levels. People talk about Canelo versus Billy Saunders, and people kept saying you're going to see levels, you're going to see it's about levels. And as well, I think there are levels of, I mean, my example that I use was when Eusebio Pedrosa came to London to defend against Barry McGuigan. He got knocked from pillar to post for much of those 15 rounds. After the 6th round, he was getting knocked from pillar to post. If my memory serves me, he was knocked down 3 times in the fight. And that dogged, proud vanity that he had as a great champion kept him through it, kept him in the game, and he saw the final bell. If you look at Bernard Taylor, who was a wonderfully talented fighter and a credible top contender who fought McGuigan next a few months later in, I think, Belfast again.
I think Taylor was actually a pound-for-pound top 10 fighter at that time as well, which gets overlooked.
He was a fantastic talent, you know what I mean? And he boxed rings around McGuigan for 4 rounds, right? Okay. But when he quit on the stool, when he had a bit of a bad round, I believe in the 6th round, I think it was. I think he didn't come out for the 7th, if memory serves. Might have been 7th to 8th. But either way, at the time I was only a teenager, and I said to my dad, oh, you know, he quit. You know, he's not like Pedrosa, he hasn't got the guts that Pedrosa's got. And the way my dad phrased it to me was, maybe Pedrosa has an extraordinary excess thereof, and maybe Taylor's just relatively normal. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's not a question of cowardice. Absolutely not. Of course it is. You know, Billy Joe laid it all on the line. He wasn't intimidated by the man's reputation. He wasn't intimidated by the big stage. You know, he wasn't intimidated by what was a hostile crowd. He was loving it as he made his entrance. He wasn't intimidated by anything, but what he came up against after giving it the best go he could, he suffered an injury which changed the fight just like that on the spin of a coin. And he didn't feel he should come out, and neither did his trainer. What else can we say?
And Mark Tibbs is an experienced trainer from a long boxing background. I think we got to respect his opinion. Yeah. If he thinks the fight should be stopped, then the fight should be stopped.
Yeah, and I think Jimmy Tibbs would have done the same. I think he'd have had the same view. I will speak to Jimmy at some point, probably tomorrow. Jimmy was disappointed not to be going out there, but he didn't get the clearance to go for whatever reason. Might be his age in these crazy times, you know. But I imagine Jimmy would have had the same view on what the stoppage last night at the retirement.
Yeah, and it's just interesting, a general thing with boxing, whereas perhaps even a few years ago, boxers, you didn't quit, whatever happened, you didn't quit. Whereas these days, I think it's getting more acceptable to maybe quit is the wrong word, but certainly withdraw yourself from a fight, or to be pulled out of a fight is more acceptable now, and probably more sensible for a boxer's long-term health as well.
If we were to look, if we were to quickly play the game of historical retirements, the ones that stand out, and we were to analyse which ones had stigma and recriminations and which ones were totally forgiven, off the top of my head, I would say Liston was castigated for quitting against Ali the first time, Clay, right?
Yeah.
I would say Duran, massively castigated for non-mass, massively so, to the point where most people have forgiven him, and I certainly have, but there are people to this day who say he does not belong in the pantheon of all-time greats for that moment. I think it's a semi-ludicrous view, actually, when you look at everything else he did, but some people feel that way. What else? I think Kostya Tszyu didn't get any ecstatic for quitting against Hatton. I think people realise that was a great champ at the end of his run, right?
Yep.
Vitaly Klitschko got a lot of stick for.
No, against Lennox.
No. I'm thinking, who was
Vitaly? He obviously was pulled out of the fight
Chris
against
Bird.
Lennox, and he's protesting the fight.
No, but Chris Bird.
Chris Bird, Chris Bird, yeah.
He got a lot of stick for that. He redeemed himself against Lennox, right? So the only reason I'm saying this is I suspect it's almost the luck of the draw. It depends on the context, I guess, whether people will. You said it's become more acceptable now. I think it often depends on the circumstances and how it's perceived by the public. I remember Victor Ortiz got a lot of stick for quitting against, was it Maidana?
Maidana, yeah.
Yeah.
I think as well, probably, you've already mentioned it, that Billy Joe is a little bit of a controversial character, and he probably says things sometimes that are not advisable to say in the public eye. And I guess a lot of the reaction has been based on his public persona as much as what actually happened in the ring.
Yeah, and the thing is, Billy Joe, he's had a great career, but he has, because he's so talented and such an amazing boxer, for some of that time he's been in his comfort zone, and he hasn't really been in that situation when, like he was in last night, so you can feel a certain way and you can feel invincible when you're in that context of beating these guys who are just never going to be as good as you. But I suppose last night was a new sensation, for him in terms of how he felt when he took that shot, when his eyes suddenly clammed shut just like that dramatically, and when he got back to the stool. I imagine he felt emotions he hadn't had before,
And as well, it's a credit to Billy Joe that Canelo has been fighting top guys for the last 2 or 3 years, 4 years, whereas Billy Joe, the last time you could say he actually fought a good level of opponent, with all due respect to his past guys he's fought, was probably the Lemieux fight in Canada.
Exactly, Kieran. And the thing about that is, I think it's safe to say Lemieux was perhaps a little bit overestimated by going into the fight. I know he lost to Golovkin. There was a lot of noise about him when he came up, right, as this big KO king. Some people were calling him like a Canadian Mike Tyson kind of phenomenon, Then he got better by Golovkin, but there's no shame in that. And people still saw him as a really dangerous, world-class fighter, devastating puncher, etc. And Billy Joe pretty much clipped his wings, and you've never really heard anything about Lemieux since, really, have you? But so, I think it's okay to look at someone like a David Lemieux fight, but you're going to have a completely different assignment against someone like Canelo Alvarez. Because whether I say I've got some suspicion about where he's got this incredible kind of Hulk-like strength and power from, the fact is he is an incredibly good fighter, a formidable fighter who ticks a lot of boxes, and he's been doing it a long time too. He turned pro at 15, right?
Yeah.
So, he's had 50 odd fights, and he's just, he is a phenomenon. I'm not going to say he isn't.
Yeah, the point I was making with the David Lemieux fight is that Billy Joe really, for a long time, he's been fighting, just to use a football term, he's been fighting at the sort of first division level or the championship level, whereas Canelo's been fighting at the premiership level. And then all of a sudden, in just one fight, Billy Joe ends up in the ring with the very best fighter in the world.
The other interesting thing, Kieran, is that it's the guys they choose to spar in camp. It's not, I know Billy Joe had a guy called Grant Dennis in camp who's like a up-and-coming pro, I suppose, like a domestic level. I think he's been Southern Area champion, I believe. He's a good guy, good fighter. But you're not talking about world-class, proven world-class fighter at all. And I know for Andy Lee, if I remember correctly, for Andy Lee, Billy Joe took Lerone Richards for sparring. Right. And the only guy he had. Because sometimes the trainers and whatever, or the camp managers, they want to cut down expenses. It's not easy to organise world-class sparring who's going to be credibly in some way like the guy you're fighting. So sometimes they just take these guys who've got maybe relative novices and they spar with them. But if you haven't had that level of competition before and you're sparring guys like that in the gym, then there's inevitably going to be the possibility that you're not quite ready for the challenge when it comes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Just out of interest, Ben, how did you have the fight scored up until the 8th round?
I've got to be honest with you, I wasn't scoring it because, first of all, I seldom do when I watch it first time with fights. I just tend to hang out and watch them and form an impression, which I know is not something you can ever hang your hat on because you need to score it if you want to start, shouting the odds about who won a fight or not. But particularly with Billy Joe last night, and the emotional involvement. I didn't score it. I mean, I was following what the commentators' difference of opinion in the score, and I know Chris Mannix had Billy Joe ahead, and the other guy Mora didn't. But I don't know about you. I don't know if you've watched it back yet, but I'm going to watch it again this afternoon at some point this evening. I'll give it another watch, and I will score it. But my impression is that he was no worse than even at the end of the.
Well, I had it 77, 75 at the end of the 8th.
So okay, and that's a situation that could.
But round 7 could have gone either way, or I think Carl Froch might have even given round 7 even on the commentary. So round 7 could have gone either way, really. And I mean, some of the other earlier rounds were close. Yeah,
they were, exactly. So I definitely want to give it another watch at some point. I'll do that.
But just one point I want to make regarding the score. There's 2 points actually I want to make with you with the score, and just to get your opinion on it. Well, more to make a point on the first one is some of the opening rounds, as you've already mentioned, Billy Joe was bouncing around a lot. He was throwing a lot of punches, but a lot of them weren't landing. Well, most of them weren't landing. I mean, when you watch the fight back, I'd be interested to know your opinion. I mean, a lot of them would be getting caught by Canelo's gloves and his arms, and he was parrying away with his left hand when Billy Joe was jabbing to the midsection. So a lot of those punches weren't landing. But when I was looking on social media as the fight was going on, people were obviously scoring those punches for Billy Joe.
Yeah.
And the commentators as well. We'll watch it back and let me know what you think later on. In the first round, Canelo landed a number of left hooks to the body, and the commentators didn't even mention them, as if they just didn't exist. And obviously that even though I think most people give Billy the first round anyway, but they didn't even mention, and that obviously affects fans when they're watching the fight at home, maybe after a few beers as well, so their judgment might be affected. And of course, if you want Billy Joe to win, you're obviously going to look at his work more favourably.
I mean, there is a tendency to watch one fighter, especially if you've got favouritism here, and it sounds stupid, and to people who don't watch boxing, it makes no sense. What do you mean you're only watching one? They're fighting each other. They're both in the shop. But you can watch one boxer, especially if, like you say, if you're pro Billy Joe or if you're pro Canelo, But body shots, I mean, I think they are frequently ignored by judges or observers when obviously they shouldn't be. I agree with you. In the first couple of rounds, I think Billy Joe was boxing well, and I think the first round was either even or Billy Joe just about nicked it, but there wasn't much going on. There wasn't much in it because it was a cagey opener for both of them. And I think Billy Joe wasn't really finding the range for his jab and his combinations until about round 4, if memory serves. So I agree with you that some of the shots were hitting the gloves, and I thought that with Kovalev, that some people were saying Kovalev was ahead when Canelo knocked him out. I didn't think so, because I just thought Canelo, while he was much more conservative, he was just so much vastly more effective with the shots he was landing.
And I think as well, the way Canelo throws his shots, I mean, he really loads up on them, and you can almost see them come in, but obviously he's just so effective and so fast, people can't get out the way of them. But obviously when you load up on a big punch, the judge can see that big punch landing. Yeah.
I mean, sure. And I think he does. I mean, these days, in this incarnation, when he hits you, he hurts you, like say Eddie Hearn said, you can hear it in ringside, and it sounds kind of scary.
And the other point I want to speak to you about, Ben, I'm just interested in your opinion. Round 8, most conventional scorecards, and all the scorecards I've looked at, including the official scorecards, scored it 10-9 to Canelo, because Canelo dominated the round. Is there an argument that round could be scored 10-8 to Canelo, because he was so dominant? He was bullying Billy Joe around the ring. He didn't get a knockdown, which is traditionally how you score a 10-8 round. But I don't know exactly it's worded, but under the words, if you have a very dominant round, you don't necessarily have to score a knockdown.
I'm usually in favour of that ethos. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. For a dominant round where somebody batters someone from pillar to post, why not give them a 2-point margin? Because otherwise, how do you differentiate it between that and a round where somebody narrowly wins a battle of the jabs? So I don't know if that round would have. I don't recall thinking that round was a 10-8, but I totally agree with you. The thrust of your suggestion, yeah. And I think maybe I'll have another look again tonight. And I am really in favour of people using those points, and using that margin when they think they should reflect dominance and effectiveness. Well, same way, like Chisora Parker the other week. I don't think just because somebody scores a knockdown, like a flash knockdown in the first few seconds, if they lose the rest of the round, then there's an argument how you should score that as well. But what is definitely lazy and disingenuous is to go straight to 10-8 for the scorer of the knockdown.
Yeah, because a fight, I remember reading an article, maybe in Ring Magazine or something. Of course, Ben's a massive Sugar Ray Leonard fan, for those who don't know. And his rematch with Tommy Hearns, I can't remember which round it was, but he battered Tommy from pillar to post, but didn't knock him down. But that was a 10-9 round. The argument was maybe that could have been a 10-8 round, despite the fact that he didn't knock him down.
And that is the perfect example for me from history. That is the go-to example. And you're so right. He battered him in the 5th round, I believe it was. And again, it was either the 6th round of the 11th or the 5th round of the 12th. I should know because I've seen it enough times. But you're right. Leonard had 2 huge rounds in the first half of the fight and one in the second half of the fight. And they were bigger rounds than the rounds in which Hearns knocked Leonard down. Where the knockdowns, they were solid, but Ray looked a little embarrassed and a little I'm not going to say he was off balance. He was chin checked and floored, but they weren't huge knockdowns. And the battering that Ray was putting on Tommy in his big rounds, and I score it on that basis. When I tell people I think the draw wasn't outrageous and it wasn't a robbery, I always make that point. I gave Leonard 2 10-8 rounds and I gave Hearns 2 10-8 rounds. The rest of it was kind of a chess match, you know. I do think Tommy was a little unlucky that night, but I don't think it was a robbery, even though Sugar Ray has actually come out, being the magnanimous sort of prince among men that he is, he's come out and admitted that Hearns was robbed. But I don't think so. And that is definitely a case of no knockdown 10-8 rounds. The only effective argument I've heard against what we're proposing, somebody once said, but that way, if you're not penalised automatically for the knockdown, like the 2-point margin, guys might start taking more of a strategic knee, knowing it doesn't really matter. He says he likes the idea of someone getting credit. Not suppose you are getting better from pillar to post, but you don't go down. His argument was your reward should be that you don't lose that round 10-8. Do you just see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't agree with it. I thought it was at least an intelligent argument against what we're saying, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'm not necessarily agreeing with it, but I'm just interested in your opinion because scoring is always controversial. And I put on social media last night that if the fight had followed the pattern it was going, and with Canelo, for me at least, was winning it, but Billy Joe was putting up a spirited performance, a lot of British fans would have been crying robbery this morning.
They would. And that would be the interesting thing. I mean, if that's what I said to somebody else about this, if Billy Joe had got to the end of the fight and been doing as relatively well as he was doing, whether Canelo deserved a decision or not, there would have been plenty of people claiming it was a robbery. There would have been, you know, which happens a lot these days, doesn't it?
Yeah. Just a final thing then, Ben. I know you haven't spoke to Billy Joe yet, but based on what you know of him and just boxing in general, I mean, where do you think Billy will go from here? I mean, do you think he'll still have the fire in his belly to come back, or do you think he's achieved enough in boxing now?
It's an interesting question because I really don't know. First of all, some people are suggesting to me that it could be a career-ending injury, but I stress that's not people from Billy Joe's camp at all. I texted Mark Tibbs last night and he sent like a boxing glove and a kiss and a heart back. So there's not really a lot I can tell from that. It was just thanks, Ben. Cheers. Yeah. He's obviously busy, but so I haven't heard it from the horse's mouth or anything. But some people are saying that it could be career threatening. We have to see. If it isn't, let's suppose he's absolutely fine and he's medically fine to box again, and I'm not suggesting he isn't. I don't know how he will feel because I know Joe. He doesn't. I think he loves the money and he loves the identity of being a fighter and being a champion, and he definitely likes the money and the lifestyle. I don't think he loves training and sacrifice and dieting and all that sort of stuff. He might feel as if he's had a exemplary career and he's earned a lot of money. Obviously, he might decide there's other things he wants to do with his life. Family and all the rest of it, and the other things that he does, the traveller kind of cultural things like the horse racing and whatever, and just enjoying his success. But traditionally, fighters have a hard time retiring, don't they? And he's very young still at 31. There's also a sense he might not want to go out like that. So if there's no kind of ongoing issue medically as a result of what happened last night, my guess would be that he wouldn't retire. Even if he announced his retirement, I tend to think we'll see him in a ring again. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I'm just thinking from Billy Joe's point of view, without a title to negotiate with, I think he might find it difficult to get big fights. And I think, as we all know, Billy performs at his best in big fights. He tends to underperform when he's fighting lesser opponents.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. It is an interesting situation he's in. Because emotionally, this is going to have an effect on him, which, you know, he's never lost before. And it's a question of how he reacts to being beaten for the first time. He's going to have to hear a lot of criticism and a lot of backlash against him, because that just goes with the territory. And he doesn't need to box, you know, financially, he doesn't need to fight anymore. I believe he is financially secure. So, as you said, it's a question of what he's offered to him and whether he'll get up for it, whether he's interested, you know, because he does thrive on the big occasions, and he does value the belts, whether I do or not. He values that recognition as a champion. You know, he said to Frank Warren when he had to give up his middleweight title, you know, over the auxiliary business and the Demetrius Andrade fight that never was. He said to Frank Warren, once his ban, it wasn't banned, but he was banned for the WBO rankings for 6 months, wasn't he? Yeah. Once that was up, he said to Frank Warren, "Get me a world title shot." And hey presto, Frank digs up a guy called what's his name, Shefat Asufi, and says, "Stevenage football ground." You know, I can't remember, was it September 2019? And he said, "Yeah, you and him, WBO super middleweight title vacant, liberated from." Was it what's his name? Zerdo, the guy's name. I can't remember. They called him Zerdo, didn't they? Whatever his name was. Forgot his bloody name. That is the state of as a world champion these days, Kieran.
Yeah, it's a joke. Yeah, I mean, to the point now, I don't even try and follow it anymore.
But do you remember there was a guy called Zerdo? They called him Zerdo. That was his nickname, but that wasn't his name. But anyway, he gave up the title, and Billy Joe and Asufi fought for it. You know, so my only point in that is that he said, "Frank, get me a world title shot. That's what I want." And obviously, the industry the way it is today, and Frank being a master wheeler dealer, he got my world title shot and he delivered it. So I understand what you're saying, yeah.
So I suppose really Billy Joe, to a certain extent, I know he's not with him anymore. He's got Frank Warren to thank to a certain extent for getting the shot against Canelo, because let's be honest, Canelo only fought Billy Joe because he had that WBO belt.
Yeah, and also I don't think it would have been impossible for Frank. I mean, obviously he went to Eddie Hearn and matchroom him because he could deliver the fight, and he did. But I don't think it would have been totally impossible for Frank Warren to have delivered the fight at some point, purely because of the fact that Canelo wants all those belts. And as you know, he'll get Caleb Plant next in September. And you'd fancy him to pick up that one as well, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Okay, Ben, thanks for joining me this afternoon. I know it was very short notice, so I appreciate your time. If anyone's got any views or opinions of what me and myself and Ben have to say, please leave some comments below. Please follow the channel, and you can find Ben on Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah, I don't really do a lot on Twitter. I must admit I hate Twitter, but I'm still there doggedly keeping a presence, although I don't really tweet much. But Facebook is where it's at for me, platform-wise. I've got Instagram too. I mean, that's kind of cool, but Facebook is where I talk boxing most of the time, and it's where I'll get the interviews with, like you do yourself, with people like Montel Griffin or Michael Elijah, Tim Witherspoon or anybody else, you know. Yeah. So if you love boxing and you don't know me already, try Ben Doughty Facebook.
And you've got a YouTube page as well, Ben?
Yeah, I've got two. I've got Ben Doughty, just Ben Doughty Boxing, I think it's called. And the other one is Fight Line with Ben Doughty.
Okay, so there we are. Thank you, Ben. Enjoy the rest of the day. Be interested to see your views on this fight once you watch it back. I'll try and look on your Facebook page to see what you've got to say about it.
I'll let you know.
Okay, mate. Lovely. Thanks. Cheers, Ben. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, Kieran.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Hello, so we're Ponte Freed. Can I take your order, please?